some volume. Hello, viewers. I'm back again with some wandering musings or some wandering rants. I found it that because I am closing up the end of my school year and really long form content is becoming more difficult for me to produce when my schedule is hectic, I realized that sometimes ideas that I had stored in my head are going to be a lot easier to say in a really organized manner while I am on the go. I have OCD, and sometimes when I'm walking and on the trails, my compulsive tendencies tend to get squashed because I'm focusing on the trail. So I can just get straight to the point because I am warding off the desire to get sidetracked because I have to pay attention to the trails. So, what I wanted to talk about in this live rambling is something that I mean to make a bigger video about. Maybe in the future I'll get back to it. But what I want to talk about was the erasure of Iranic identity in the post-Sasanian pre-Safavid era, right? And specifically in terms of arms and armor and the military class of Persia, or Greater Iran. Now, people are going to be screaming at me, where are the sources? Give me your sources. Well, I'm going to post the sources down below when I get back from the hike, so you can just relax a second before you start screaming at me for sources, because I'll get to them. But there's a problem with the erasure of Iranic identity, and that is when Greater Iran was conquered by the Arabs in the 7th century and subsequently taken over in smaller areas, general history and general populace, especially within the arms and armor and historical weapons community, tends to do this thing where they immediately start classifying the warriors in the region and their arms and armor as the people that ruled them. And that is highly, highly problematic. It is academically dishonest, and it is culturally ignorant of the many, many groups of people that made up the armies, and not to mention the other warrior castes, the other warrior groups of the Islamic world. So my question here is, why is it that pre-Arab conquest, things in the greater Iranic world, or for better lack of terms, Persian world, they get called Persian arms and armor? And then when the Safavid dynasty comes in, it's called Persian arms and armor. But everything in between that 7+ hundred years in between that, the idea that native Iranians fought and had military power and position and still continued to produce arms and armor just gets lost. For some reason, Persians or Iranic peoples between the 7th and the 16th century just vanish in everything. And I'm trying to really grasp where that idea comes from. And I think it might be a broader notion that people that once another culture takes over, everything is absorbed into that culture. Well, that couldn't be further from the truth. One example of this, I always say, is just because the Dutch took over parts of the world, parts of Africa where the mambele was used, we don't call it the Dutch mambele. It doesn't magically become a Dutch weapon. This is why it confuses me when, you know, the armaments of native Iranians were still being produced and worn by them as fighters when Iran was occupied by other people, but suddenly that armor now becomes the culture of other people who occupied them. One of the biggest examples of this, right, is there's a lot of Persian helmets that have the eyebrows above the gold or just regular eyebrows above the eye openings. Well, I see so many times on armor sites, discussion boards, that's called a Mongol helmet. And I ask all the time, why are you calling it a Mongol helmet? It's like, well, because it was found in Iran during the Ilkhanate and Timur period. So it's a Mongol helmet. Like, no, not really. It could have been worn by someone who was Turco-Mongol. The eyebrow helmets always get called Turkish, which is beyond me. But if you look back to rock reliefs of the Sassanid era, there are people wearing helmets, Iranians wearing helmets with the eyebrows on them. And it is truly baffling to me when those helmets were found in regions of Iran where Mongol, Turkic, and Islamic influence didn't permeate down as far, that it can still be called Mongol. And then if you look at iconography, other miniature paintings, things like that, you don't really see anyone represented as a Mongol warrior wearing those helmets. Additionally, I'm acknowledging the idea that Persian influence was massive on Mongols and Turkic people, right? The Seljuks Persianized, the Mongols Persianized, Timur Persianized. I get it. And I'm not denying that Persian influence didn't permeate into these armors. That's a cross-cultural thing. It's going to happen either way. But this idea that is in Mongol-style armor of origin is highly problematic. Because every ounce of evidence that we have, archaeologically, culturally, things from museums, all points to these helmets being either discovered or manufactured in areas where influence of other cultures didn't reach very far. So yeah, just something else to keep in mind. Secondly, is kind of the erasure of Iranians and their service in the military in the Middle East after the Muslim conquest. So yes, for the first couple hundred years, many Iranians who did not convert to Islam and remain Zoroastrian were not yet allowed to fight in the military. They weren't. This is where you have Zurkhane movements booming, right? So they can keep training while not allowed to fight. Eventually, that lifted. And as a lot of Iranians converted to Islam, they were allowed to reabsorb back into the military. Even the Zoroastrians reabsorb back into the military in certain roles. Generally, probably as mercenaries, but they reabsorb back into the armies. I think you need to look at the fact that these Iranians or Persians, as they're referred to by a lot of the times with Arabs, were administrators. They knew how to administrate. They knew how to run societies. They've been doing it for a long time. So eventually there's a matter of trust that was built back up. And a trust back up by the Arab rulers that the Persians could wind up, absorbing back into the army without too much of a fear of rebellion. Now, there were some initial Iranians that during the Arab conquests did convert almost immediately, and they served as heavy cavalry. The cataphracts, the heavy cavalry, ended up being absorbed into the Muslim armies, and there was no heavy Arab army at this point. Cataphracts, heavy Iranian cavalry, became what was heavy Arab cavalry because of its integration into the army. So I'm not going to speak a ton more on this. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to my area, which is the Timurid period. And this is where so many people see my kit and they have to yell and scream at me that it is Turkish, it is Mongol, it's not Persian. Well, they say that because Persians didn't fight in the armies there. They were either slaves or they were administrators. And I'm like, that is the most ridiculous notion in the world, seeing that not only are there accounts and records of Timur bringing infantry, Tajik Iranians, to Ankara, right? He recently he often hired Mazandans as mercenaries. There were a lot of warlords in Iran that were maintaining their power in cities, and local militias and garrisons of native Iranians were called to fight during Timur's service. And they would then in turn bring their weapons and armor with them, many of them being of their native style. And the sources I'm going to link talk about these militias. They talk about these people that were called these warlords. And what happens is during the Timurid period, the early Timurid period, you've got a power vacuum that develops when the Ilkhanate collapses. And between the collapse of the Ilkhanate and Timur's rise, all of these Iranian warlords and elites start to kind of come to power, and they take advantage of Timur's loose rulership style. He ends up basically saying, okay, we're going to conquer, leave you alone, maybe destroy your city if you don't surrender. That's a different story. Then we're going to say, pay taxes to me and call up the times of service, and we're good. So that is where the situation of Iranians fighting in foreign, in the service of foreign rulers show up in my period. So I think we need to stop looking at labeling these foreign rulers, and we need to stop labeling the arms and armor that were created by native peoples during the time of foreign rulers and stop associating it with the foreign rulers. There were, calling my 14th century kit Timurid is ridiculous. Timurid is a ruling dynasty of people. It's a bloodline. An armor cannot be from a bloodline. It can be an ethnic, cultural item, but it is not that of a family. So we need to stop calling everything that it originated during that time period in the Islamic world by the name of who ruled the area, right? In the reign of Timur, there were Armenians and Georgians that were under Timur's service, but we still call that armor Georgian and Armenian armor. We don't call it Timurid armor. So that doesn't make any sense to me. So we need to stop looking at who ruled the area as the classification of the armor. I'm going to post the sources when I get back home, but that was just my quick rant on this, that I am not denying cultural blend. I am not denying that my armor couldn't have aspects that was shared by different cultures. Turkic, Mongols, Iranians. What I'm saying is to immediately dismiss its cultural origins and state that my interpretation of an Iranian or of a Persian warrior wearing this armor is inaccurate because Turks and Mongols also wore things similar or took things from it, is just academically dishonest and really obnoxious. So I'm going to post a couple links talking about the Iranian and Persian peoples that served under Timur, and hopefully that answers your question. And anytime that I get comments, I can just point them in this direction. So thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next time on Bayt Al-Asad. Thanks.